You guys, watch out, don't swear too much.
Shalom Aleichem. Yes, don't swear too much, I'm sure. This is Rabbi Ephraim Osgood. We're at Congregation KINS in West Rogers Park. It's April 29th, 2015, and I'm hosting a lovely Parasha Shiur, Acharei Mot-Kedoshim for us Americans who are doubling up on our Parashiot. Anyway, I wanted to begin this week, and from past experience, sometimes we don't get past the point of beginning, and that's okay. We don't have an agenda, so if we wander off, that's perfectly fine by me.
Right.
But I wanted to begin with a continuation of our discussion concerning pshat, literal meaning in the verse. And it's actually a really fascinating example in Kedoshim that we're all very, very familiar with. Not only are you familiar with it, you're probably familiar with at least 2 or 3 of the interpretations. And you may be surprised to know the quote-unquote source of some of them. I'll start with the pasuk, of course. So if you want to turn to Perek Yud Tet, chapter 19, pasuk Yud Daled, 14, verse 14. I'm sorry, I don't have that one because I'm using the Mikra Gedola with all the Mefarshim.
660.
660. So,
Yudal, is that you said?
yeah.
Okay.
Lo tekalel cheresh v'lifnei iver lo titain michshal v'yirat v'yirata me'elohecha ani Hashem. I guess you didn't get it, Dad. That's okay. You can be with us on the phone. Don't worry about it.
What?
We just started. I just read Perek Yud Tet Pasuk Yud Daled Lo Tekalo Cherish V'Lifnei Iver Lo Titain Michshal V'Yareta Me'elohecha Ani Hashem. So do not curse a deaf person, and do not place a stumbling block before a blind person, a blind man. And you should fear me. You should fear your God, because I am your God. I am Hashem. So any one of you guys is probably familiar with some of the interpretations here. I just told you what would be the literal interpretation, but perhaps, according to our discussion last week, not necessarily the pshat, because sometimes Chazal, sometimes the rabbis interpret not according to the pshat. So some of the groups through history that objected to that path would be the initially Kutim. The Kutim were the predecessors of the Sadducees, the Karaites, and other streams of Judaism that we find today. I want to read to you a short comment from the Meshech Chachma, Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating what he says. Hakutim mefarshim kimashma'o. The Kutites, right? This is a group dating back to the biblical times, the Nach, and then into the times of Chazal, and Chazal looked down upon them very much so because they rejected Chazal's authority to interpret oral tradition. In other words, they only believed in the literal meaning of the written word. So the fact that they translate it, they explain it according to how it sounds literally, that the pasuk, the verse is only talking about tripping a blind person and cursing a deaf person. That makes sense. Shelo yitain even lifnei iver, don't put a stone before a blind person. V'derech lahapilo, in order to, in his path to trip him up. V'chein hu emet. That's a little bit shocking. And this is the truth. So Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, I can tell you, big long beard, big black hat. He says, oh, the Kutim had it right. Now, I won't tell you what he goes on to say because he goes on to discuss some of the different interpretations. But the first thing he says is that the Kutim had it right, which is really strange. And I want to circle back to that. But how could it be that this opinion identified as that of the Kutites in the Gemara is no problem? Good news. Additionally, one more comment I'm going to read, but first I want to ask you guys a question. If we take the pasuk at face value, what exactly are we being instructed? What is the purpose of this mitzvah and in its specificity here?
Don't take advantage of the disabled.
Don't take advantage of the disabled, okay?
Yeah.
Why specifically don't curse a deaf person?
He can't defend himself. He doesn't know what you said.
He doesn't know what you said. He can't defend himself.
He can't hear himself.
He can't hear. On the other hand, one might say, well, he can't hear, so no harm, no foul.
Oh,
I enjoy cursing people.
he can't defend himself.
And he didn't lose and I gained. So
But I say he can't.
He can't defend himself. No, I hear what you're saying.
He doesn't know. He can't hear.
He can't do anything about it because he doesn't know. On the other hand, you haven't really necessarily harmed him because he didn't hear you, right? What about putting a stumbling block before a blind person?
He'll get hurt.
He'll get hurt, yeah. Now, what would be the classic problem with this interpretation? The classic problem with this interpretation is, first of all, it's forbidden to curse anybody. When we're cursing, I don't know if we'll get to it inside, but generally the Rambam explains specifically, we're talking about cursing him with God's name, right? In other words, using the profanity, the real profanity, right? Like I curse somebody by God's name, I bless somebody by God's. But again, I'm not allowed to curse anybody. So is there a specific prohibition now because the person is deaf? On the contrary, perhaps. Or as was pointed out over here, maybe there is a purpose to that. What about putting a stumbling block before a blind person? Can I trip up somebody who is able-bodied? Somebody who is able to see where they're going? Is it okay to put a stumbling block before him? Not so much, right? So the specific commandment over here, if we would understand it in a literal sense, while applying, and perhaps that's what Rav Meir Simcha Dvinsk is saying, is that it's not that the literal meaning is untrue, but is that the commandment? Is that all that the commandment is? Is that the extent of the commandment? Right? So we're seeing here that this certainly could be a place where Chazal are going to tell us something more. Just in terms of some of the other classic Mefarshim, I did a little bit of a survey among the classic Mefarshim, who's explaining maybe according to literal meaning and who's not. The Ibn Ezra and the Rashbam you always look at sort of first when you want to know the literalists. On the other hand, Rashi claims to be a literalist, right? Rashi claims that he's explaining, I'm only coming to explain the literal meaning. And yet, what does Rashi say here? Ainli ela cheresh, I only have a deaf person. Minayin l'rabot kol adam. How do I know to include everybody? Talmud Lomar, we learn from the rabbis, ba'amcha lo ta'or, that it's anybody. Im kain lama nemar cheresh. Why does it say a deaf person? Ma cheresh hamiyuchad shehu b'chayim, af kol shehu b'chayim. Yotzei hamet she'enu b'chayim. It's an interesting interpretation. It's an example of a person who's alive. Interesting.
What person's alive?
A person who is...
Not to curse a person that's alive.
A person who is deaf is still considered to be a live person.
But you have to go out of your way in each instance over here to do something. And why do you bother to do something? You have to go out of your way to put the stone. You have to go out of your way to curse somebody. So what purpose is there getting up in the morning to begin with?
You're making a fundamental and fabulous and very important point here. You're saying it in a different, in a bit of a roundabout way, and I think you're saying exactly this, which is the Torah really here to instruct us to not be a hideous, horrible, disgusting person? Isn't there a core, isn't there a base of human behavior that the Torah doesn't have to tell us? Don't stick your foot out. Don't put a stone there when you see a blind person coming, right? Don't pick on the disabled something that we should just, as human beings, and I promised last week that we'd come to it. It's not this week, but I do want to get back to this discussion of morality above and beyond what's written in the Torah. But I think what you're saying is like, what is that really what a person's going to do? Is the Torah really?
Obviously, that we're wrong because we're such a small minority, and everybody else must be right because they all do it.
They all trip blind people?
Sure.
I mean, maybe.
Go any place in the world right now. There's somebody killing somebody else. Why are they killing somebody else? Extrapolating to the highest degree. Murder.
Well,
why do you kill somebody? Did they bother you? Did they do anything to you?
I will posit, and this is also a different subject that I'm happy to come back to a different week, but I will posit that most of the killing that I assume you're referring to is actually being done by people who are not only claiming that it's not wrong what they're doing, but in fact, it's
A mitzvah.
a mitzvah. It's a commandment. It's godly.
So who's right?
And by the way, I gave this class a couple of months back. I hate to point out, but they did actually, to some extent, get the idea from the Torah, because we do have the idea of religious war in the Torah. A difference that I could point out is that the Jewish people fail in that mitzvah. They fail in that obligation. But well, I thought you're talking about mass murders, maybe.
No, it's not a religious war. Mass murder is not necessarily a religious war.
Sometimes, not always. You're correct. Not always. And the truth of the matter is, here in America, where certain morality is accepted, the society theoretically is based on Judeo-Christian morals. I will agree with you as well that we do live in a society now where there's nothing that's off limits in terms of humor and making fun of people. And yes, we live in a culture of political correctness and all of that. On the other hand, within media, within television and movies, etc., there is a growing and ever popular genre of literally making fun of the most helpless people. And so I think we are regressing to some extent.
No, that has nothing to do with religion.
Certainly not. And it's the antithesis.
If somebody has a defect, you have the open right to attack. And that's the way society is being built now. So consequently, since right makes might, or might makes right, excuse me, are they right and we're wrong?
Well, I will posit then as well, and then let's refocus here for a minute, because I wanted to try this week to stick a little more to the text, and then we'll get to see afterwards which way we preferred, getting completely off the point or sticking to the point. But I will posit that the Torah's system, when introduced into the world, was certainly novel, and the Torah said things like money doesn't rule the world, and might does not make right, and stand up for the disadvantaged, and stand up for the orphan and the blind and the deaf, and don't judge somebody because they can bribe you or because they have more money or because it will be advantageous to you. So the Torah did present the system of social justice before it was at all in vogue anywhere in the world. And I think that any idea that we have in the world of social justice definitely has its core in Torah values. Whether we all live by it all the time, that's a different story. Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher lo yecheteh, right? Shlomo HaMelech said that there's no tzaddik in the land who hasn't sinned. It's the final line in a printout I made of something I might give to you at the end, continuation of a point we were making in the previous week. But nobody's perfect, right? We in Judaism don't believe in perfection, right? This is another side discussion that we probably won't get to about Nazir, right? A famous machloket about Nazir, but maybe we'll get to it later. Okay, so that's the Ibn Ezra says that ba'avur sheyesh lecha koach, because you're strong and he's weak. So because you're strong and he's weak does not mean that you should take advantage of him. I think he's talking about a literal interpretation, and we said last week that the Ibn Ezra was wont to interpret in a literal fashion. And yes, that's true. You're not allowed to do even the literal. So Chazal had other interpretations, but the Rashbam says, Behove hakatuv medaber. This is a common repass of the Rashbam, Rashi, where they explain that it's not that the pasuk is exclusive, but the pasuk is speaking about the common category. It's agreeing with you, actually, that that person is more susceptible due to their infirmity, and people are more likely to pick on them. And therefore, the pasuk, specifically pointed them out because they are more likely to be victimized. Again, hopefully, we think of a world where people don't pick on the disadvantaged, but it certainly was a reality, and the Torah is waking us up to that. However, the Rashbam is not necessarily exclusive there. And the Kli Yakar is the other really interesting one that I wanted to bring. The Kli Yakar says that because the verse finishes with the words, and you should fear me because I am your God, what is that telling us? Why does the verse end with that? We see it in other places, but it's sort of completely out of context. What does your fear of God have to do with not cursing a deaf person and not tripping a blind person? Any thoughts?
I guess Hashem will defend
Anybody
those
around?
people.
Is there anyone around to see what I'm doing?
Hashem is around. Hashem will defend those people. Good. Don't think that because nobody else saw, or because the person can't defend himself, that God won't. On the contrary, you should fear me. The Kli Yakar says a little bit differently, and this needs to be explained, and I'll come back later to hopefully explain it. He says that it's because it's speaking about things that are in your heart. What do you think he means that it's speaking about things that are given over to the heart specifically?
Isn't that a dichotomy? Your heart can't speak. How can you say speak from the heart?
That's why I'm a little bit confused by his...
No, I think it's very clear.
Yeah, so...
I can hear you if you talk, but that's not about meaning what you're saying. Your heart was entirely different than what comes out of your mouth. So consequently, God doesn't listen to your mouth. He listens to your heart.
Well, but here when you're cursing the deaf person, you're...
It doesn't make any difference. That's why. He's listening to your heart, not what you're saying, not what you're hearing. He is talking from his heart. The blind person can't see, but he is seeing from his heart.
I see what you're saying. You're saying it's as if you're speaking from your heart because there isn't somebody to hear it. So it's as good as if...
So God can hear you.
But God can hear you no matter what.
Or you're dumb or you're blind.
Interesting. Very interesting. I like it. Very interesting.
And the other thing that always amuses me, we say that we protect the orphan and the widow. That's the biggest joke in the world.
Why is
we say
that?
it every day. Check the orphan and the widow. And who do we attack the most? The orphan and the widow. How can you say it every day when you daven and when you don't mean it? So it's actually what's not coming out of here because you say that when you daven.
Who attacks the orphan and the widow?
You're saying it every day. You protect your responsibility is to protect the orphan and the widow. But when you go outside on the street, who's the first person you're going to attack? they're the least able to defend themselves.
Well, that's the point,
Consequently,
isn't
what
it?
we're saying in the morning, we're a bunch of liars.
Well, no, we're saying that God should protect them because people are going to attack them.
Don't put everything onto God.
Well, this is what the verse says. If you go to Parshat Mishpatim in Shemot, it says, if you pick on them, I am going to, I don't even want to say it, it's so harsh, but it said, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to turn your wife into a widow and your children into orphans. God, so to speak, I don't think that it's literal in every case, but God promises harsh judgment towards them. Now, you might have a case against God. Does God always follow through on that? Sometimes we don't see justice in the world. Yesterday, I was showing my Jewish history class the very interesting film, A Life Apart, Hasidim in America at HTC, the high school, Skokie Yeshiva. So Leonard Nimoy, Alav Shalom, just passed away over Pesach, I believe. So he's narrating the film, and he quotes Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, who the Chassid comes to Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and he says, it's Yom Kippur, and he says that he asked God, you're asking that I should ask you for forgiveness? What about me forgiving you for everything that you've done? And Rav Levi Yitzchak said, you said, God, I'll forgive you if you forgive me. He said you shouldn't have let God off the hook so much. He's probably got a lot more than you. You should have held on to God, and you could have brought Mashiach, which is something the Hasidim, like to talk about a lot. Everything could bring Mashiach. But the point he's making is that certainly we could say to God, do you always defend widows and orphans? We don't see it. Right? Fair enough. It's a fair argument. There is a lot of injustice in the world. So we stand up for values. We teach values. Then there's people. And unfortunately, the people don't always follow the values. But the values hopefully are there. And hopefully they're there to be followed. Now, the Rambam, we always have to come to the Rambam. He says that even though he can't hear, still, right, just like you said, and in terms of the blind person and the stumbling block, he says that anybody who doesn't see a takala, a stumbling block, he explains that we're talking about a moral stumbling block. Okay, so I want to get to some of the different interpretations here that we saw hinted at in some of these Mefarshim. Some of the different interpretations are, okay, number one is the literal interpretation, the Kutim. Okay. Number two is anybody who doesn't see stumbling blocks. This is based on Onkelos, because Onkelos, the Targum, he has his Aramaic translations, and based on the fact that he says Delo Chazi, one who doesn't see, and Delo Shama, one who doesn't hear, and in other places he uses the specific deaf and blind, he seems to be saying we're talking about blind in this matter or deaf in this matter. And again, the Rambam explains, for example, it could mean morally. What do I mean morally? Well, number three is not quite getting there, but number three says you give bad advice to somebody. You want to marry a girl, so you tell your buddy how awful she is, so he won't marry her. And then you swoop in. It's kind of one of the examples given in the Gemara. But anytime you give somebody bad advice, in Torah, in not Torah matters, whereas the fourth explanation is, what is lifnei iver lo titein michshal mean? Are we familiar with this explanation? Helping somebody to sin. The classic examples given are, if you give wine to a Nazir, one who has pledged not to drink wine, You help him violate it. I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but it's very difficult to violate this on a biblical level because you have to actually be the only opportunity the person has. In other words, if he could do it on his own and you're sort of just helping him along, that doesn't fit into the category. That's called misayali de'ov de'avere, helping somebody sin. I have an issue with this category, by the way. The issue is a tiny little thing called free will. Right? I know as a parent and I know as a teacher, I don't know how you guys relate to the world, but responsibility is big by me. And this seems like the opposite of responsibility. Oh, it wasn't my fault. He helped me. He gave me the bottle.
But you the originator.
But you drank it, right?
Yeah.
He didn't hold you down and pour it down your throat because Ones Rahmana Patre, God, if somebody is
You put
forced...
the stumbling block in front of them?
Yes.
So you're not responsible?
Well, you seem to be taking the other side. Good. We always need tension.
No.
You're saying both of them are responsible or just the stumbler?
Absolutely. In fact, you're more responsible than he is.
Because he couldn't have done it without you.
Yeah, if he didn't have the bottle, he would have drunk it. So you got him the bottle. So you can't stand there and say I'm innocent.
Let's take the Nazir out of it for a minute. Guy's an alcoholic. Whether I know or I don't know he's an alcoholic. And I bring him a bottle of liquor and he drinks it.
You've broken two commandments.
But you don't
Well,
know for yourself.
let's say I don't know. Let's say I don't know. But he,
What?
You just said you know he's a
Okay.
Nazir, and if he's a Nazir, you know you're not supposed to drink. So you do know.
okay, so if I do know, then we definitely going to hold him responsible and not the alcoholic?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, the alcoholic has no
If
responsibility?
you didn't bring the bottle there, he wouldn't have drunk it. Don't absolve yourself. We do that all the time. We do something and we absolve ourselves of it.
It's interesting that you're using that phraseology, right? Because I think some would use that phraseology on the alcoholic or the Nazir and say, don't excuse yourself. You have to take responsibility. Somebody gave you a bottle, so say no. Turn it down. I could see it both ways.
But
No?
sure, you're absolutely correct. But, by offering him the bottle, knowing full well that he's a Nazir, you know that he's going to succumb.
So basically, I think what you're saying is in line with the Torah, with the Chazal's interpretation that they're both responsible. They both committed a
But
sin.
you're more responsible than he is. You're going to throw free will at me? Oh, come on now. He's fighting every tooth of the way, and you come along with a full bottle of something that he wants. And then you're going to say, well, you have free will. You don't have to take it from me.
It's interesting what you're pointing out. It's very interesting what you're pointing out because I don't want to get into the entire interpretation, but the idea is presented in the beginning of Avodah Zarah Daf Gimel, I believe, that a person does not sin unless they are overcome with a spirit of insanity. So what do you mean? A person doesn't have free will? And in one way to interpret this is that at the time they're actually sinning, there is no free will. When did the free will happen? Maybe deciding not to be friends with the guy who's going to bring him a bottle of alcohol, right? Maybe not going to a place where some fool might bring him a bottle of alcohol. But at the actual moment, I think you're right. If a guy's an alcoholic, when the guy brings him a bottle and sticks it in his hand, he's got no chance maybe of not drinking it. Could be, right?
You went out of your way to present him with an obstacle that he couldn't avoid. He was purposely sitting in Shiur, being a nice, quiet, everybody.
And you invited him to the Kiddush Club?
Everybody does this. They build up a scenario to defend their issue. But he was not going out of his way. You went out of your way to bring him the bottle.
I mean,
You went out of your way. You put the stone in front of him.
so is he absolved completely now?
Don't give me that. You went out of your way. If you would have gone out of your way to put the bottle on the table, to put the stone in front of him, then he wouldn't have had anything to drink.
So this is interpretation number 4, and you have advocated for it admirably. Lifnei iver lo titein michshol. You are not allowed to be an enabler. An instigator, an enabler. We do have a responsibility. Kol Yisrael Arevim zeh bazeh. We are all responsible for each other. We have to be good influences on our friends.
Is that only for Jews, or is that for everyone?
Well, that's a specific verse there, but I believe that we have a responsibility to humanity and mankind as well, absolutely.
Well, if you talk to some people, no. This is only written for Jews.
I would love to get back into that discussion at length because I wholeheartedly disagree. I do think I quoted to you 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, the Smag, Rabbi Moshe Kusi, Sefer Mitzvot Gedolot, where he argues vehemently against that point of view. And this is somebody who was persecuted mercilessly by the Christians and who witnessed the burning of the Talmud in
Germany?
it's France, the disputation in France, right, in 1242. And yet he says that how in the world do you think that our job is to go out and cheat and lie if it's Gentiles? That's flies in the face. Flies in the face, right? Kedoshim Tihiyu. We're not getting into Kedoshim Tihiyu a little bit. It's too classic, but certainly Kedoshim Tihiyu means that you are commanded specifically, if nothing else, to be a standard and to be an example. And I think we've done that, by the way. I do think to a large extent we have done that. I think we have brought the world along in terms of morality, in terms of right and wrong. I think we have brought the standards up in the world. But a person who says, no, not interested, all I care about is the Jewish people and the Jewish world, and the rest of the world can, go to pot for all I care. I don't think that that's what the Torah is interested in. I will quote to you a person who I hope lives up to his strong start, and I hope does not get assassinated like one of his predecessors, and that is General al-Sisi in Egypt, president of Egypt, who got up quite boldly and bravely in front of not laymen, but clerics, imams, and he said to them, these interpretations you guys have, first of all, he says that's not the religion, it's your corrupt interpretations. And he says, but what, I don't understand you. He says, your view is that you 1.5 billion Muslims should kill the rest of the world, and then you'll stand alone, and you'll have a great world. We just killed off 4/5 of the population of the world, and now everything is good. Mishigas. Unfortunately, I think some Jews might have such a point of view, right? Unfortunately, some Jews might have a point of view. If we just got rid of everybody else and we had this whole place to ourselves, the world would be a better place. I don't think that God gave us the Torah to build ourselves up and forget about everybody else. There's a whole world out there, and they're all children of God, and they are all created in the image of God. If he put us into service as his messengers and as his spokespeople, that's one thing. But I don't think he put us into service and said, well, I'll just forget about 99% of everybody else and worry about you guys. That's illogical, I think. And I'm sure you would agree. Not all
I
of them.
need you down here in West Palm.
You agree, Dad?
My fellow, to convince my co-religionists that the world didn't begin with Abraham Avinu. It started with Adam Rishon.
Maybe, could be. Ken Zainach. We won't go further with those guys.
Same Vega.
Yeah.
Adam. Yeah, that's the Vega is Adam.
Maybe Ken Zain, but we'll leave it at that. We don't want to we don't want to really blow their socks off with some non-literal interpretations. Speaking of non-literal interpretations, so what comes out over here is some interesting questions. Number one, if the pshat is true, so then why are we looking for other interpretations in the verse? If what Meir Simcha Dvinsk, the Meshech Chachma, also the Or Sameach, but here the Meshech Chachma, if the Meshech Chachma says that the literal meaning is true, don't trip a blind person, don't curse a deaf person, so then why were Chazal looking for other interpretations? And I'll tell you, by the way, that both he and the Torah Tamima, they say that all of the interpretations that I just gave you, all four of them, are all true. And they're all law. Just so you know, it doesn't get too crazy. The Rambam says as long as they're derived from one verse, they can only be counted as one commandment. Okay. But why were the rabbis looking for further interpretations? Legally speaking, if the pshat, if the literal meaning is true and is relevant. Any thoughts? I may have given away one of the answers earlier. And one answer I came up with is that it's true that that literal meaning is there, but first of all, that's not something that really needs to be taught on a mitzvah level. That's basic humanity. That's not a quote-unquote chidush. That's not novel.
Where does mitzvah come into all of this? Everything has to be rewarded with a mitzvah.
Well, that's the question we're asking. Exactly.
Why can't you just say, these two comments over here are just so general that it'll cover everything. I don't expect to get a mitzvah by being good to somebody.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Most of the time, what I hear is if I do this, I'll add to my mitzvah point.
Well, that I think is clearly the wrong interpretation, right? Mishnah and Pirkei Avot, we should not serve to receive reward.
That's what you're getting. If you do this, you get 5 mitzvah points. If you say 100 Amen, you get 10 mitzvah points. It's not the idea that you do the mitzvah point, you do the mitzvahs, or you do the commandments for the commandment's sake. No reward is necessary.
I will tell you what the Rambam says on the subject, because that I think will be an answer that you will prefer, perhaps.
It's not a question of my preferred.
Well, will make sense to you, perhaps. The Rambam agrees with you completely. And the Rambam beyond that says we don't even know what the system is, obviously, and we don't know what's a reward and what the length of a reward.
Challenge God and say that you're doing something wrong.
You know what the Rambam says, though? He says most people, they need the carrot. Most people need to believe that there's a reward to keep them moving. Most people aren't going to be motivated by the truth. What's the truth? The Rambam says the Torah is about perfecting you as an individual and gaining a greater understanding of the world, becoming a better human being. It's not about the carrot. It's not about the reward or the punishment. But majority of people aren't thinking about perfecting their character and gaining a deep understanding of the world. Most people need to be motivated by that. As an educator and a parent, we say over and over and over again, mitoch shelo lishma bo lishma. Let them do it for the wrong reason and they'll come to do it for the right reason. But really, that's a lifelong process, isn't it? Finding the right reason, doing something for the real reason and for the real motivation, and not having an ulterior motive in one's actions. That's not a simple thing now, is it?
In other words, you're trying to say that people will do things just to get rewarded?
Most people, don't you think? This is what our friend is positing, and I have to agree with him wholeheartedly, and I have to agree with his disgust as well, because I don't think that is the proper approach. I don't think the proper approach is that. I don't think the proper approach is, what can God give me today? I'm going to daven my Shemona Esrei, and let me get out my list of demands.
I'm going to daven to get rewarded.
Right. And I'm going to daven not only to get rewarded, but Hashem's going to make me rich in this world and powerful. And
So if you look for reward, can you daven?
he's not. He's saying that he thinks that a lot of people are focused on that.
Do you daven to be healthy? You do. I do.
Mhm.
I daven and said I should be healthy.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you're
It's a
saying?
reward too.
I say so. It is. In a way, it's a reward.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I think the reward that we were mostly talking about was the idea of
Can't take health.
reward beyond this world. You can't take it with you.
Can't take health for granted.
Oh, that. Yeah, well, that's
So-
true, but that's true. But I mean, the thing is, and this is in all fairness, and this is a real focus of mine. The Torah doesn't talk about the next world, but maybe a hint in one or two places.
I'm not talking about the next world.
Right.
I'm talking about this world.
Right. The Torah talks about this world. You want to talk about health? The truth of the matter is, if a person is using the Torah to improve himself mentally and his understanding of the world, the Rambam claims at least, and you guys might know better than me, I haven't gotten there yet, but you've had 1 or 2 more years experience. The Rambam says that if a person gets to that understanding, they can become shalem, they can become at peace even with the idea of death. He says that one of the main purposes of the Torah is that you should accept even that. Right. If you, though, that's his point. That's his point. If you're really focused on enjoying Olam Hazeh, and by the way, this is the Rambam according to his opinion in the Machloket that we didn't discuss because I assumed you guys have heard this Shiur already about Nazir, right? The Rambam versus the Ramban. But the Rambam certainly believed that it's very positive to enjoy life in this world to the fullest. He did not believe in asceticism. He called it the way of the priests, right? He said the Christians are ascetics and we're not. The Rambam absolutely eschewed asceticism. Say that 10 times quick. But life is about life in this world. Life in this world, by the way, treating the blind and the deaf with dignity and respect. Treating everybody with dignity and respect, Jew and Gentile alike. And if a person does that, not only, I think, are they going to be healthier, because our physical health is a product of our mental health and is a product of how we feel about ourselves and the world, but also perhaps when those ailments do inevitably come, we can accept it. I'll tell you, my father, he should live and be well, lost sight in one of his eyes a couple of years ago. Wasn't too much fun, but he still spends most of his day sitting studying a Gemara. He didn't use it as an excuse, and he didn't use it as a cop-out. And he goes on with life. And you know what he said to me? Probably on more than one occasion? It's good. Now my wife can't make me drive. So, you know, there's always a positive side.
He does not drive.
He only has sight in one eye, so you're not allowed to drive because you don't have
Depth.
peripheral and depth, right? So it's illegal to drive with that particular ailment. Not that there haven't been those who, you know, fooled the DMV and memorized the chart. I think I drive next to them sometimes, but you know, so there's always some positive side. It takes, but isn't that true that when you meet somebody who has an ailment, who has a disability, a disadvantage, and they take it positive, don't you say that person, they've really figured it out? We don't say, oh, Nebuch, that person, he's got his head in the dust, you know, he's just lying to himself. We don't say it. We don't think about that person. We think, wow, that person is at peace. I heard a story this week. A guy was accepted at on the USC football team, which is his absolute favorite team in the entire world, to be a long snapper. That means the guy who throws the ball back 15 yards. He's blind. Like completely blind, not like legally blind. Like little tap left, and he knows where to throw it. I mean, that's amazing. And that's a person who never said, what don't I have? But how can I use whatever I do have and overcome any obstacle? And we've seen a million examples, I'm sure. And when we look up to those people, because to people like myself, you know, we spend a lot of our lives complaining about our tsaros and our difficulties and our challenges. But again, I think that the Torah is a path and is a way towards accepting whatever our lot is in this world.
This defeats what you just said a little while ago. You see, the blind person, the deaf person is a much more animated person than you think. See, the blind person, you say, can throw the football. The deaf person doesn't have to listen to the nonsense in the world.
You're telling me.
It's positive as well. You've heard of Helen Keller, and you've heard of this gentleman who's an anti-Semite, but he's the world's outstanding physicist in London. And they have abnormalities that you wouldn't want to live with, but they have overcome them. So this isn't a defect. It may be a blessing. And you're overlooking that.
I'm not overlooking it. My grandmother and my grandfather, who I never met, they were deaf. And my grandmother was, and my father will back it up, it's his mother-in-law. And he had a great relationship with her, which says it all, doesn't it? But
yes,
she was the happiest person you ever met in your life. I mean, I cannot remember seeing her, she lived till 90, without a smile on her face, a huge smile. And by the way, she didn't speak that much because she was deaf at a year old, but cracking jokes and...
So we can't let you analyze these two systems.
Well, that's not the point. The point is a reality. A reality is they can't hear you cursing them. The reality is that most of them...
You will get the ability, not them.
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
the whole thing. We feel sorry for these people, but in many aspects, you kind of can say, you know, they're lucky.
Agreed.
And they live a more moralistic life than we do. Because we say things that come back to haunt us later on. If they can't hear the bad stuff, they don't know what to think about it. But now Helen Keller, she learned how to type, she learned how to communicate. Putting a stumbling block in front of people, I don't know.
Not only did she learn all those things, but I think she probably appreciated every single one of them more than all of us, right? I mean, she absolutely, when she finally did learn how to communicate, appreciated it more than anybody else and got joy out of life, we call sipuk hanefesh, to probably an amazing degree. And that's exactly what we were talking about. Focusing on this world and enjoying this world. You know, they say, and Hashem, I always not marvel at Hashem makes the world in an amazing way, right? They say that when a person is missing one of their senses, the other senses are heightened. So yes, it can be to help them, but also they appreciate things with their other senses much more so, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I was with a younger crowd, I would speak about Marvel superhero Daredevil, who's blind and has an amazing ability in the world and capability in the world. It's another thing I like to do, but I imagine this is not the crowd for that. Yeah, Dad? It's
I know. My superheroes are all...
my father's on the phone from Florida, West Palm Beach. Yeah, he's with us every week. I know it's your first time here. Thank you for joining us. My father's joining us on the phone. So let's make one or two more points. We have about 7 minutes left, so I'll share with you this printout I made. I think you'll enjoy it. It's just a continuation of a point we were making a couple of weeks ago, but I thought you would enjoy it. It's a back-to-back. I'll direct you in a moment. I got my hands on a PDF of this amazing book. I just started it. It's called The Making of a Gadol. You may have heard of it. It was banned probably 20 years ago now. And the author was the son of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, and he wrote a history of all these Gedolim in Europe and the facts of their life and the truth of the facts of their life. And it wasn't appreciated, even though he put in, 1,500 pages, 1,400 pages of work, and that was his hope, was to be volume number 1. So to get a copy of the book is at least $500 minimum, but online I have a PDF, a document of it. So
A lot of things are better not said.
well, that's what we're going to
That's what they're
discuss.
against.
That's what we're going to discuss right now, as a matter of fact, because we were discussing this, I think, the first week, maybe when you weren't here, you were here last week, but we were discussing this whole idea in hagiography. So I put a little mark over here where it starts, but then I underlined a couple of sections. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Schwab. Rabbi Shimon Schwab says that the difference between history and storytelling is that the first must be truthful and unsparing of even the failings of the righteous. And Rabbi Schwab asserts eloquently that a realistic historic picture will reveal inadequacies, which will rightfully make a lot of people angry, and no ethical purpose is served by preserving such a picture. He contends that we must put a veil over the human failings of our forebears and glorify all the rest which is great and beautiful. In other words, he favors storytelling over history. He coins an adage: we do not need realism. We need inspiration from our forefathers. Rabbi Mordechai Schwab, his brother, had a negative view of storytelling, however, when he told me that the Satmar Rav, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, never told stories because he said you can't educate through lies, through falsehood. And then he brings a story here that I'll just paraphrase, but Rab Shimon Deutsch asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe whether he should include in a story about his father-in-law a person who didn't support him when he became the Rebbe and actually held that he wasn't the Rebbe. And he said, history must be written emet la'amita, truth to its truth. This includes not polishing up a single word. There's a different story elsewhere about the Lubavitcher Rebbe that he supported a publication about his town back in Russia that included talking about his brother who was not from, and another brother who was in a mental institution. And he monetarily supported the publication of that book. He didn't have an issue with it, even though it didn't paint his family in only a positive light. So on the back over here, he has the other opinion, though. Rav Chatzkel Sarna insisted that not only that he should write about the controversy of the Musar movement. He's talking to an author, Rabbi Dov Katz. I know nobody here ever heard, but there were some problems between the Hasidim and the Gra, the Misnagdim. But he said that he should set down in writing a full affair without omitting any detail, be what it may. So the author says that I cannot subscribe to Rav Schwab's asignation to anyone of a right to become angry with my revelations, because in no way do I consider the stature of great rabbis and Rosh Yeshivot diminished by describing them as they were. If due to my untinted description, some readers view some great man or another as having a slight failing or imperfection, did not the wisest of men declare with divine guidance, Ki Adam ein tzarich tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yechtez. There's no tzaddik in the land who hasn't sinned. There are those who claim, he writes elsewhere, that, well, the only person who can talk about inadequacies of great men is a prophet. But after prophecy, forget it. It's all storytelling. And
what do we do with the Magids then? The Magids go around and everything is beautiful. So who do we listen to? I've read books and books of the Magid Shiurs, and they always leave me wanting.
Because it's not a realistic picture of what happened.
But we keep printing them by the thousands every year.
Absolutely. And this book is fascinating because it's not such a book. And there's an 80+ page article as well, I think I mentioned, by Rabbi Dr. J.J. Schafter of the Center for the Jewish Future at Yeshiva University, where he also writes about these type of books that you're complaining about and how they're not really helpful. Because, in my opinion, to give an unrealistic picture of the world, well, what are some outcomes of that? A child grows up and they are not a tzaddik and they're not perfect. And they think that they're the worst person in the world because they have human failings. They don't say, even the greatest had human failings. Even the greatest weren't perfect. As a matter of fact, they say if a person made a mistake, we'll just give an answer for it, right? This is the modern derech of Chumash. Is every sin isn't really a sin. And every sin will just give a different interpretation to. Right? Rabbi Akiva, the greatest sage in the Mishnah, made a horrible, horrible error. He thought that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. And in retrospect, the man was not worthy of being the Messiah by a long shot. And I read a book recently about false messiahs, and the author was getting a lot of criticism from people who said, how can you say Rabbi Akiva made a mistake? And he said, I won't say it. I won't write it in my book. I'll quote 27 Gedolim, 27 great rabbis who say it. And he quotes 27 rabbis who say it. So I think what you're pointing out in terms of those books is a modern day phenomena. And I can tell you, I don't think it benefits our youth to have unrealistic delusions of grandeur and perfection. He points out a person who has a slight fault, it makes their overall personality even greater. We all know truth when we see it, and we all know falsehood when we see it. And to put these Bubba Mices out there, it doesn't give people a realistic picture of anything. They know that it's not serious. Okay, thank you guys so much. I'm going to end the video here.